In this video, I'll demonstrate how to set up and use Mekorma Vendor Validation tools in Acumatica. Our validation tools help AP departments do two things: match vendors' tax identification numbers against the IRS database, and ensure that your vendors are not included on the sanctions list of the Office of Foreign Assets Control. Let's look at how you would set up validation tools and then how it functions within your ERP when onboarding or paying your vendors. After you've purchased one or both vendor validation tools, you need to make sure your subscription is active. Go to the Mekorma registration window and click on Refresh Products. This will activate your license as long as it's current. Once active, an administrator or someone on your IT team needs to configure settings in the Mekorma AP Configurations window, according to the business rules determined by your accounts payable leader. This will define your settings for each provider and how to handle vendor status if the system returns an incorrect TIN or a match on the OFAC list. For the log settings, determine how much data you want to store in the verbosity field. In the log level field, choose what kinds of data you want to trace. The default settings will trace details of any errors received. Providers refer to the individual services we offer. In our case, both TIN and OFAC are providers. You can determine what should happen when both validations are performed. If you check the payment level settings here, it enables vendor validations to run automatically at the time of processing payments on a schedule you determine. You don't have to validate every time you do a pay run. We've set the default cadence for every 90 days. But if you work with a lot of foreign vendors, you might want to choose to validate more often for OFAC screening. The global provider settings allow you to define the minimum match percentage here. For example, if 90% of a business's name matches with an entity on the OFAC list, you will get a warning result. In this section, you can choose whether to hold a vendor's payments if the validation results return a warning or an error. For example, if the OFAC sanctions list returns a warning because there was a partial match, you may not want to hold payments for that vendor. But if you get an error, which means a full match is likely, you may want to hold payments until your team can do more research. TIN provider settings allow you to configure a few things that are specific to the TIN matching process. If you want to hold payments when a TIN match fails, check the box here. In this field, you'll want to determine which vendor name to run against the IRS database. There are 3 separate locations in Acumatica for a company's name to be defined, so this ensures we're running the validation on the correct one. Additionally, adding retainage will help protect your company. Instead of paying the full amount on any given invoice, you can tell the system to hold back a percentage, and that retained amount can be released to the vendor once they provide an accurate tax identification number. We've set the default percentage to 26%, which is the requirement for withholding taxes according to the IRS. Choose the account for holding retainage funds here. Once these settings are in place, you'll have the magic of automated validations completely integrated into your vendor onboarding and payment process. Vendor validations are most useful when onboarding a new vendor to make sure you have the proper documentation and that your organization will not be at risk if you engage in business with that vendor. You probably ask for a W-9 when collecting new vendor information. The vendor needs to provide you with an accurate TIN as part of that form. When you enter a new vendor's data into your Acumatica system, Mekorma Vendor Validation tools will automatically send out a call to check the TIN against the IRS database and check the business name against the OFAC sanctions list. Let's see how it works. My system is set up to run both TIN matching and OFAC checks. For example, I've just added a new vendor called FrontSource. I'm going to make sure I've added their TIN from the W-9 they submitted. Once I save the new vendor, the validation tools automatically run behind the scenes. In just a few seconds, I get a process completion message and I can check the vendor validation results. Validations can come back with these possible results. For TIN match, OK means there's no issue. There was a match and you're good to pay. Error means the TIN match was not successful and you'll want to get accurate information from the vendor. OFAC results will return as either OK, which means the vendor was not found on the OFAC list and you can feel confident about paying them, or warning, which indicates there was a partial match you may want to look at more closely. Error means a full match and you should definitely investigate. You can check any individual vendor's validation status in the Validation Results tab and see a history of all validations performed. Please note, if you want to run a manual validation on an individual record, you can do so by clicking here on Validate Vendor. Anytime I update any field on an existing vendor's record, Mekorma Validations will automatically run again to check TIN numbers and OFAC status after you save your changes. For example, if I change a vendor's address or the phone number, the Mekorma validation process will run and return current results. The vendor audit functionality allows you to view current status for all vendors. And you can create audit records to send to an AP manager or a leader for approval. This may be a process you want to run on a regular basis, like every quarter. If I look at Blue Line, I can see their payments are being held because they have an error on the TIN match, and I'll need to take action to correct the issue so I can then release the hold. I can also manually run the validation tools on one or multiple vendors here, or all vendors by clicking here. I may want to run a new audit, which can then be submitted to a manager for review and approval. This helps the AP team stay on top of any issues and can be part of your vendor management strategy. As you know, you can set your validations configuration to check vendors at the time of payment on a regular schedule of your choosing. As an example, I've got payments ready to go. When I process, it's going to run a check on those vendors who haven't been validated in the last 90 days because that's the time frame I defined. If any vendors come back with a TIN error or an OFAC warning, the payments for that vendor will be held. Mekorma's vendor validation solutions can help your AP team save time, energy, and cost when managing vendors. Thanks for watching.